In September 1552, a monumental threat loomed over Eger Castle, its ancient walls showing signs of decay. 40,000 Ottoman soldiers encircled the modest fortress in northern Hungary, poised for a siege. Captain István Dobó was acutely aware of his troop strength. He commanded a mere 2,000 individuals, trained warriors certainly, but also the elderly, untrained peasants, women, and children. No reinforcements were anticipated. A relief army was nowhere in sight. King Ferdinand, from Vienna, sent letters brimming with promises of aid, yet these assurances amounted to nothing more than ink on paper. Faced with a numerical disadvantage of 20-1, any rational commander would have contemplated surrender. However, Dobó grasped a crucial truth. Should Eger fall, the entirety of northern Hungary would collapse like a house of cards. The silver and gold mines of Kassa would fall into Ottoman hands, and the route to Vienna would lie exposed. Europe itself would be irrevocably altered. The pertinent question wasn't whether they could prevail, but rather how 2,000 individuals could achieve the seemingly impossible. Before we proceed, please share your current location and time in the comments to give us an idea of our audience's reach. Here's a question for you to ponder and answer by the end of this video. Was Eger's victory a miracle, pure luck, or the result of a brilliant defensive strategy unprecedented in its time? To unravel this, we must journey back to 1526, to a battle that forever reshaped Hungary's fate. On August 29, 1526, on the fields of Mohacs, the Kingdom of Hungary ceased to exist. This wasn't a metaphor, it was a literal annihilation. Blood and bone were irretrievably lost. In less than 2 hours, the Hungarian army was utterly obliterated by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. 20,000 Hungarians perished on the battlefield.
King Louis II, a mere 20 years old, drowned in a marsh while attempting to escape in his heavy armor. Yet the true catastrophe wasn't the defeat itself, but what ensued. Without a clear heir, Hungary plunged into civil war. Two factions, Ferdinand of Habsburg and John Zápolyi, vied for the crown. While they squabbled over power, Suleiman acted decisively. In 1541, Buda, Hungary's 1,000-year-old capital, fell not through battle, but by deception. The Ottomans invited Hungarian leaders to peace talks, then seized them as hostages. The city capitulated without resistance. A harsh lesson was learned. Sometimes wars are won not with swords, but by the betrayal of trust. By then, Hungary was no longer a unified state. It lay torn into 3 parts, like ripped paper. The northwestern sector fell to the Habsburgs. The central region, encompassing Buda, became Ottoman territory.
The eastern part, Transylvania, transformed into a puppet state, paying tribute to Istanbul but maintaining the illusion of autonomy. This was more than a territorial division. It was an operation to excise the very soul of a nation. For 11 years, from 1541 to 1552, the Ottomans solidified their dominion. Temeshvar fell in July 1552. Szolnok surrendered without a fight, as its garrison soldiers simply fled at the sight of the immense Ottoman army. An additional 25 Hungarian fortresses crumbled like chess pieces. By September 1552, the Ottoman summer campaign had achieved resounding success. Only one obstacle stood between them and the complete subjugation of northern Hungary: Eger Castle. Why was Eger of such paramount importance? At first glance, it appeared to be merely a small hilltop fortress. However, a glance at a 15th century map reveals its strategic significance. To the north lay Kassa, a hub for silver and gold mining, supplying vast revenues for the kingdom. To the west, a road led directly to Vienna. If Eger were to fall, the Ottomans wouldn't just gain riches, they would secure a perfect logistical route for an assault on the heart of Europe. Qasim Ahmed Pasha, the Sultan's second vizier, understood this perfectly. He had systematically destroyed every fortress on his northward advance. Veszprém, Gergely, Segel, all had fallen. He commanded 40,000 elite troops from Rumelia and Anatolia. He possessed 16 enormous Zarbuzan cannons, capable of firing stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. He also had 150 smaller artillery pieces, He even brought 2,000 camels to transport wood for siege constructions. On the other side, standing atop Eger's walls, Captain István Dobó commanded 2,000 individuals. The siege would last 39 days. What transpired during those 39 days would become legendary. But was it a miracle or sheer skill? Continue watching to discover the truth.
Let me clarify something. István Dobó was no tactical genius. He wasn't a legendary warrior destined for conquest. He was merely a minor nobleman, born around 1500, who grew up in a fractured Hungary and chose to side with the Habsburgs in the power struggle following Mohács. Yet, one quality set Dobó apart. He was a man who planned ahead. When appointed commandant of Eger Castle in 1549, Dobó did not celebrate. He surveyed the crumbling walls and grasped a harsh truth. The Ottomans would come, not might come, but would come. And when they arrived, no one would save Eger except those defending it. From 1549 to 1552, Dobó toiled relentlessly. He wasn't the kind of individual to rally troops with dramatic pronouncements from city battlements or through fiery speeches. Instead, he was the meticulous sort, who meticulously inventoried every sack of wheat in storage, inspected each cannon, and precisely calculated the gunpowder needed for a 30-day or 50-day siege. He didn't hire 6 German artillerymen for their wealth, but because he understood that in contemporary warfare, technical expertise outweighed mere bravery. He constructed timber fortifications in Szolnok, 100 kilometers to the south, establishing an additional defensive perimeter. When Szolnok fell in 1552, he didn't succumb to despair. Rather, he gleaned valuable lessons from that setback. However, Dobó's most crucial decision pertained not to armaments or fortifications, but to people. News of the impending colossal Ottoman army sparked panic among the villagers surrounding Eger. They fled, not out of the region, but into the castle itself. Hundreds of men, women, and children poured into Eger, seeking refuge. Any other commander might have turned them away, deeming it insane to feed more mouths during a siege. Dobó, however, thought differently. He flung open the gates and welcomed them. Why? Because he perceived them not as a burden, but as a valuable asset. Every pair of hands could transport stones. Every woman could boil water. Every child could deliver messages. In defensive warfare, no one is useless. There are only those who haven't yet found their suitable task. And there was one young man Dobó particularly trusted, Gergely Bornemissza. Bornemissza was 26 years old in 1552. He was an educated Lutheran, seemingly ill-suited for military service, yet he possessed a rare aptitude. He understood explosives, not just how to deploy them, but delving into their chemistry, mechanics, and how to transmute gunpowder into a weapon unforeseen by the enemy. Dobó entrusted Bornemissza with command of 250 infantrymen. More significantly, he granted Bornemissza the liberty to experiment, innovate, and invent. This decision ultimately saved Eger. In early September 1552, when scouts reported the approach of the Ottoman army, 40,000 men, 16 massive cannons, 150 artillery pieces, Dobó gathered everyone in the castle. This was not an inspiring address. It was an unvarnished proposition. According to Géza Gardonyi's novel, Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, based on historical records, Dobó declared, "For those more concerned with their own hide than the nation's destiny, the door remains open. I need men. A few lions are better than a multitude of rabbits. Let those who tremble at the approaching storm depart before I speak further. For we must swear to defend this castle. If anyone breaks this oath, they will not face God after death." Nobody left, not because they weren't afraid, but because Dobó offered them something more profound than the hope of victory. He gave them a cause to fight for. On September 9, 1552, the Ottomans arrived, commencing the most harrowing 39 days in Hungarian history. To grasp what transpired next, one must comprehend the Ottoman Empire's command structure and its fatal flaw. Qasim Ahmed Pasha was the senior commander, leading 2/3 of the forces, approximately 27,000 men. Yet, Ali Pasha of Buda possessed genuine strategic brilliance. Ali understood artillery.
He had only 4 large cannons under his direct command, but he positioned them flawlessly, firing with deadly precision at the wall's weakest points. Ahmed and Ali harbored mutual animosity. They vied over tactics, glory, and whose name would be recognized when Eger fell. But Dobo observed this from the ramparts and recognized it as the enemy's initial vulnerability. For the first week, nothing transpired, and this was the most terrifying aspect. The Ottomans were in no hurry to assault. They established camp, dug trenches, and meticulously prepared siege equipment. Ahmed Pasha was not impulsive. He had witnessed too many failed sieges due to premature attacks. He aimed to execute everything perfectly, but this methodical approach afforded Dobo vital time. Time to organize the defense, time to allocate roles, time to transform frightened civilians into a coordinated defensive force.
He segmented the castle into sectors, each overseen by a trusted officer: Gaspar Ptah, Gergely Bornemissza, Istvan Zaleh, and Janos Figeti. Each was accountable for their section of the wall. Each understood that if their sector fell, the entire castle would follow suit. The women were organized into teams. Some continuously boiled water in enormous cauldrons, others prepared bandages and tended to wounds, while still others carried ammunition and stones to the walls. The castle became a singular organism. Every component supported all others. On September 16th, after a week of tense anticipation, the bombardment commenced. Just imagine the cacophony. 16 Zarbuzans and 150 smaller cannons firing simultaneously. Stone cannonballs, each weighing more than an adult man, hurtled through the air at terrifying speeds, impacting stone, wood, and flesh. The explosions reverberated like ceaseless thunder. Dust blanketed everything. People could not hear, breathe, or think. For 12 days, from September 17th to September 28th, the shelling continued unabated. Nearly 12,000 cannonballs battered Eger, but those that did not penetrate were embedded in the walls, silent testaments to the destructive power the defenders confronted. The bastion sustained significant damage. The outer wall, defended by officers including Pito, Bornemissza, Zolte, and Efegod, suffered critical damage. Cracks appeared, and stone fragments broke off. In certain areas, the walls began to crumble. However, while cannons roared above ground, a different kind of battle waged below. Both factions understood the art of sapping. Tunnels were dug beneath enemy walls, reinforced with wood, and then the supports were ignited to bring down everything above. Ottoman sappers commenced digging from their trenches, slowly advancing toward Eger's foundations. Yet, they were unaware of one crucial fact. Eger was constructed upon the remnants of an ancient stone fortress, which had, in turn, replaced an even older earthen fortification, possibly erected by the Huns. Eger's foundations were more formidable than any stronghold the Ottomans had ever besieged. The stone here was not merely hard, it was thick, deep, almost impenetrable. And Dobo possessed individuals skilled in listening. Hungarian miners placed their ears to the earth, detecting the digging from below, then burrowed to intercept and thwart the tunnels. They clashed underground in hand-to-hand combat amidst complete darkness, fighting with daggers and bare hands, never seeing each other's faces. All Ottoman sapping attempts failed. This bears emphasizing, as it underscores Dobo's strategic foresight. He didn't just prepare weapons and provisions, he prepared for every type of assault the Ottomans might employ. Undermining was a standard Ottoman siege tactic, so Dobo prepared counter-tunnels. Artillery bombardment was anticipated, so he stockpiled stones from collapsed walls to hurl back. Scaling ladders were inevitable, so he organized teams to douse attackers with scalding substances. This set Dobo apart from other commanders. He didn't merely hope for the best, he readied for everything, and then he readied for the worst possible scenarios. September 29th, the feast day of St. Michael. Ahmed Pasha decided enough was enough. 12 days of bombardment, the walls severely compromised. It was time for a full-scale assault. What ensued was one of the fiercest battles of the 15th century. The Ottomans attacked concurrently from multiple directions. Thousands of Janissaries, the Sultan's elite troops, surged onto scaling ladders. They were unafraid of death, trained from youth to perceive death in battle as the highest honor. They cried Allahu Akbar and ascended like an unstoppable wave, but they were unprepared for what awaited them at the top. Gergely Bornemissza had spent 2 weeks crafting weapons the Ottomans had never encountered. Primitive grenades, clay pots filled with gunpowder, nails, and metal shards with burning fuses. Barrel-sized bombs large enough to detonate and incapacitate 10 men simultaneously. And his most audacious invention, a massive watermill wheel packed with gunpowder and nails, ignited and then rolled down a hill into the tightly packed ranks of the Ottomans. The spectacle must have been terrifying. A colossal burning wheel hurtling down the hill with increasing velocity, exploding amidst the throng of men climbing the ladders. Those nearby were torn apart by shrapnel, others crushed by the wheel itself. Panic spread like wildfire. But that was not all. When the Ottomans reached the tops of the ladders, they encountered the women of Eger. History tends to exaggerate women's roles in wars, but in Eger, that role was authentic. Not because they wielded swords, although Bertillon's famous painting depicts this, but because they transformed everyday objects into weaponry. Boiling water from cauldrons, molten pitch from barrels, scorching lead from melting crucibles, stones from ruined walls. The women poured, threw, and pushed all of this down the siege ladders. An Ottoman soldier would ascend with hope, only to meet a woman at the summit holding a bucket of boiling water. A most excruciating death followed. Contemporary sources corroborate this. Italian diplomat Girolamo Martinelli documented these scenes not as legend, but as brutal fact. The women of Eger, including Kataka Dobo, possibly a relative of the captain, actively participated in the defense, not by choice, but out of necessity. The Battle of September 29th lasted all day. At one point, the Ottomans breached the Occipitorium, an old gate tower. Janissaries poured inside, secured their position, and began firing upon the defenders from within the castle. This was typically the moment most sieges conclude. Once the enemy penetrates, all is lost. But Dobo did not panic. Standing on the shrine bastion, he ordered all the largest cannons to be aimed at the old gate tower, where Ottoman and Hungarian soldiers were engaged in close-quarters combat. Officers objected, stating, "Firing there will kill our own men." Dobo calmly retorted, "Better to sacrifice 10 of our men than lose the entire castle." The cannons fired, the tower crumbled, burying both Ottomans and Hungarians. But the position was reclaimed, and after fierce hand-to-hand fighting amidst the debris, the defenders effectively repelled the Ottomans and even pushed beyond the walls into their trenches, driving them back to their camps. The assault orchestrated on September 29th ended in failure. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers perished, yet their forces still numbered 30,000, poised for another offensive. This particular incident strikingly showcases a core aspect of Dobo's leadership, his unwavering readiness to make truly difficult choices. Issuing the command to fire upon one's own troops is a decision that deeply impacts commanders throughout their lives. Nevertheless, Dobo possessed a profound insight into defensive strategy, understanding that excessive sentimentality is detrimental. In that moment, saving merely 10 combatants would have led to the loss of 2,000. The collapse of a tower portended the fall of the castle, and the loss of the castle would mean surrendering the entirety of northern Hungary. Consequently, he made this arduous decision, and his soldiers recognized its gravity. They understood they were following an individual prepared to do whatever was necessary for their collective survival. Such a leader might not inspire affection, but he commands trust, and in warfare, trust holds far greater value. The psychological ramifications for the Ottoman forces were substantial. They had channeled all their might into attacking Eger on St. Michael's Day, launching a full-scale assault with breakthroughs at multiple points and overwhelming power. Yet this entire effort was repelled. They were not merely halted, but driven back with staggering losses. For an army accustomed to victory, to witnessing one fortress after another crumble, this outcome was inconceivable. How could these individuals, outnumbered and outgunned, defending damaged walls, continue their resistance? The answer, which the Ottomans failed to grasp, was simple. Eger's defenders knew precisely what they were fighting for. The Ottomans waged war for the Sultan's glory, for conquest, for imperial expansion. The people within Eger, however, fought for their children, their homes, for their very existence as a people. This fundamental distinction between battling for abstract glory and fighting for survival created an invisible barrier that the Ottomans could not surmount. October arrived, ushering in unexpected changes. Autumn in Hungary typically unfolds gradually, but in 1552 it descended abruptly. Temperatures plummeted, nights turned frosty, and then the rains began. Not just rain, but torrents that transformed the ground into mud and soaked everything thoroughly, seeping through every tent canvas. For the defenders secured within the stone castle, this was merely an inconvenience. But for the 40,000 Ottoman soldiers camped outside, largely in cloth tents, it became a living nightmare. Their uniforms remained perpetually damp. Food spoiled and grew moldy, but even worse, diseases started to spread. Dysentery first appeared in the overcrowded military camps, where tens of thousands shared the same water sources and huddled in cramped quarters. Illnesses proliferated with terrifying speed. Soldiers began succumbing not to Hungarian swords, but to their own intestinal ailments. Day by day, the number of sick swelled, from dozens to hundreds. However, logistical problems proved even more debilitating. The Ottomans had brought immense quantities of gunpowder and cannonballs. But after 20 days of relentless bombardment, supplies began to dwindle. And not just once. Each cannonball had to be carved from marble, a process that took hours. Production could not keep pace with consumption. As a result, Ahmed Pasha's massive cannons fell silent for over a week, awaiting ammunition. The terrifying artillery advantage of the Ottomans, their greatest strength, was crippled by a simple logistical breakdown. Then there was the issue of food. Rice rations dwindled further, and rumors of corruption spread. Officers were allegedly selling food to soldiers for personal gain. Whether these rumors were true or not, they eroded morale. Soldiers did not fear dying in battle, but they despised the feeling of being exploited by their own commanders. The atmosphere in the Ottoman camp shifted from confidence to doubt, then to despair. How many soldiers had they lost already? 8,000? 10,000? And for what purpose? To conquer one small, seemingly worthless castle. Meanwhile, conditions inside Eger were far from easy. The defenders had lost approximately 400 to 600 men, almost a third of their initial combat strength. Each bastion now held fewer defenders, and everyone was utterly exhausted. They had fought all day and maintained watch all night for 3 consecutive weeks. Sleep was a luxury, and food supplies were dwindling. Gunpowder, though meticulously conserved by Dobo, was also finite, and everyone knew that another major assault could break them. On October 11th, that assault materialized. This time, Ahmed Pasha committed everything. No reserves, no intricate tactics, just brute force. Tens of thousands of soldiers simultaneously attacked every point along the perimeter, hoping to breach the defenses somewhere. For 2 days, October 11th and 12th, Eger endured hell. Ottomans scaled ladders from all sides simultaneously. Bloody clashes erupted at every section of the wall. There was no safe haven. All soldiers, civilians, women, and even children old enough to carry stones joined the fray. Bornemissza used his last grenades. Women poured the final buckets of boiling water. Cannons fired until their barrels became too hot to touch. Yet, the Ottomans pressed on. Jagged waves of Janissaries swarmed up the ladders. These were not conscripts or reluctant soldiers, but professional warriors, trained throughout their lives for such a moment. They stepped over their fallen comrades without hesitation. If one ladder was pushed away, another immediately took its place. When boiling water eliminated a dozen men, 20 more instantly arrived to fill their void. At the northeastern bastion, the defenders ran out of rocks for hurling, forcing them to dismantle their own fortifications for additional projectiles. Against the southern wall, the women, having exhausted their water supply for boiling, began dousing attackers with scorching oil, a more perilous yet significantly more destructive method for the assailants. Near the western gate, Captain Borna's final barrel bomb claimed 30 Ottoman lives, but in doing so, damaged the gate itself, necessitating urgent repairs. Across the entire siege, improvisation became the order of the day. Shattered cart planks transformed into shields.
Broken pottery was repurposed as ammunition. Even handfuls of earth were scooped up and flung into the faces of the Ottomans, temporarily blinding them. Every object, every substance, every desperate notion was weaponized. This depicted battle-worn despair, not the romanticized cinematic portrayals of heroic last stands, but the grueling, sanity-eroding exhaustion of individuals who had fought for weeks and knew they couldn't afford a single moment of respite. On October 13th, after another failed assault, a palpable shift occurred within the Ottoman camp. An eerie silence descended, not one of preparation, but of profound despair. Ottoman officers openly began to quarrel. Ahmed accused Ali, Ali accused Ahmed, and both blamed their subordinate officers. These officers, in turn, blamed the soldiers, who were too weary to care about assigning fault. This was no mere tactical disagreement. It signified the complete disintegration of command cohesion.
When Ahmed ordered yet another attack, some units hesitated. When Ali positioned artillery, other commanders questioned the efficacy of further bombardment. The once unified Ottoman war machine fractured into factions. Then, on October 17th, rumors began to circulate through the Ottoman camp, whispers destined to become legendary. Turkish soldiers, witnessing the Hungarians fight with what appeared to be superhuman strength, started exchanging stories. They claimed the Hungarians drank bull's blood, which explained their immense power. They had seen Hungarian beards stained red during battle. In reality, it was red wine. But the Muslim Ottoman soldiers, who abstained from alcohol, were unaware of this. They asserted that the Hungarian women were witches, capable of boiling water with magic. They murmured that the castle itself was enchanted, protected by ancient spirits. Of course, all of this was nonsense, yet in warfare, truth often matters less than what people believe.
And when an army begins to believe it is fighting something supernatural, its will to fight crumbles. This is what truly happened with the legend of the blood custom. The Hungarian defenders, weary and frightened after days of bombardment, needed something to boost their morale. Dobo had wine brought from the castle cellars, not for intoxication, but to give the terrified men a moment of courage. Medieval people believed wine possessed restorative properties. Whether this holds true medically is irrelevant. The psychological impact was paramount. Soldiers, trembling with fear, drank the wine and felt a warmth spread through their bodies. For a fleeting moment, they felt strong again. They returned to the walls with renewed vigor. Ottoman observers, witnessing this transformation and noticing the red wine stains, concocted their own explanation: magical blood. But the real magic wasn't in the wine, it was in the belief. The Hungarian defenders believed they could continue fighting, and so they fought. The Ottoman attackers believed they were battling something unnatural, and thus their confidence faltered. This reveals a profound truth about human psychology in extreme situations. What we believe about our circumstances holds more weight than objective facts. The objective reality for the Eger defenders was that they were starving, exhausted, running low on ammunition, and outnumbered 20-1. But they believed they could hold out for one more day, and they did. And then they believed they could hold out for another day, and they did again. Meanwhile, the objective fact for the Ottomans was that they still held overwhelming numerical superiority, ample supplies, and the capability to continue the siege for months. But they believed they were fighting something indomitable, so they began to break. On October 17th, another massive assault was launched. The Ottomans flung themselves at the walls with desperate fury. This was no longer tactics, it was raw emotion. Commanders, having lost thousands of men, demanded something, anything, to justify these immense casualties. The soldiers, having witnessed the demise of their comrades, yearned for retribution. The assault that followed was less about conquering Eger and more about avoiding the feeling that all the previous deaths had been in vain. The skirmishes that day were the most brutal of the entire siege, devolving into hand-to-hand combat on the ramparts. Warriors fought and plunged from the walls together.
The besieged were so enervated they could barely lift their weapons. The attackers were so exasperated they took unwarranted risks. At one point, a section of the southern wall partially collapsed due to incessant bombardment.
For a fleeting moment, it appeared the Ottomans would finally breach the defenses. They surged toward the breach, like water through a dam's fissure. However, István Dobo was there, not issuing commands from the rear, but personally standing in the breach with a sword in hand. At 50 years old, an age considered elderly in the 15th century, he fought like a young warrior. Not because he was exceptionally skilled with a sword, which he wasn't, but because his mere presence held far greater significance than his combat prowess. When the defenders saw their commander, resolute in the breach and refusing to yield, they discovered strength within themselves they didn't know they possessed. They rallied around him, forming a human barrier at the point of collapse. The breach became a slaughterhouse. So many Ottoman bodies piled up that the attackers had to clamber over corpses to reach the defenders. The October 17th assault persisted from dawn until late into the night. When it finally concluded, both factions were so depleted that soldiers simply collapsed where they stood. The defenders felt no triumph of victory. The attackers executed no organized retreat, only mutual exhaustion. That night, in the Ottoman command tent, Ahmed Pasha confronted reality. His army had lost somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 men, possibly more. Casualties in 15th century warfare were notoriously difficult to ascertain. Diseases spread unchecked through the camp, and supplies were perilously low. Morale had vanished, and the castle showed no signs of capitulation. He faced a choice: prolong the siege into winter, watching his army slowly dwindle from illness and desertion, or withdraw now while he still had a cohesive force to command. On October 18, 1552, Ahmed Pasha ordered the retreat. There was no final dramatic clash, no heroic gesture.
The Ottomans simply gathered their belongings and departed, leaving thousands of their dead interred in shallow graves around the fortress. The weary Hungarian defenders stood on the walls, observing the vast army slowly vanish to the south. Then, as the last Ottoman disappeared from view, everyone in the castle began to realize they had survived. No one shouted in jubilation. They were too fatigued to celebrate. Some simply sat down where they stood. Others wept, not from joy, but from the immense relief of shedding 3 weeks of accumulated terror. 300 defenders had perished, 200 were wounded. Many would never fight again. The castle lay in ruins. Most of the bastions were severely damaged. Food was almost gone. Gunpowder was nearly depleted. If the Ottomans had returned after a week's respite, Eger would have fallen in a day. But they did not return. Not because they couldn't, they still had 30,000 soldiers, but because something in their spirit had broken. Eger had proven that the Ottomans were not invincible, and once the myth of invincibility is shattered, it can never be fully restored. We must grasp the psychological impact on both sides during these final days, because the siege of Eger was ultimately decided not by weaponry or tactics, but by human endurance pushed to its absolute limits. Within the castle, the defenders held on solely through sheer willpower. Food rations were so severe that people were constantly hungry, though not starving to death. Prior preparations had prevented that. Yet, it was a persistent hunger that sapped their strength and clouded their minds. The lack of sleep was even worse. Maintaining round-the-clock combat readiness for weeks inevitably leads to dangerous exhaustion. Under such conditions, individuals start making errors. They mistake allies for enemies, fall asleep on watch, their reactions slow, making them vulnerable in battle. Dobo recognized this peril, hence he continuously rotated defenders, ensuring no one stood watch for more than a few hours at a stretch. But with only 2,000 people guarding the entire castle perimeter, even rotations couldn't guarantee sufficient rest. The psychological toll was likely worse than the physical exhaustion. Imagine living under continuous bombardment for weeks. The roar of cannons never ceases. Buildings crumble without warning. At any moment, a cannonball could pierce the roof and kill you in your sleep. Such prolonged stress shatters people, both visibly and invisibly.
Some defenders developed what we would now term combat trauma. Uncontrollable trembling, an inability to speak, a vacant stare into the void. In the 15th century, there were no terms for this. They simply called it battle-struck. Dobo could not afford to dismiss these individuals. He needed every capable warrior. These injured soldiers persisted in combat, their condition worsening each day. The female defenders faced additional hardships. Many were mothers with children sheltered inside the castle walls. They fought on the fortifications, their minds preoccupied with the safety of their offspring hiding in the cellars. Some were expectant mothers, still toiling, carrying stones and heating water, nurturing their unborn babies. Historical accounts offer only brief mentions of these circumstances, yet one can scarcely fathom the profound struggles involved. Pregnant women in their final stages of pregnancy ascended stairways with buckets of boiling water, keenly aware that a single misstep could lead to a double tragedy. Children experienced the siege in ways that are almost beyond our comprehension. Medieval childhood was inherently harsh. High mortality rates, scarce food, and perilous living conditions. However, the siege heaped unbearable psychological trauma onto this existing hardship. Children witnessed their parents' deaths. They saw bodies torn apart by cannon fire. They endured screams that formed the fabric of nightmares. Some children were pressed into service, tasked with delivering messages or small provisions. Others huddled in cellars, terrified and disoriented. Perhaps the elderly suffered the most acutely. Incapable of fighting or performing heavy labor, many felt purposeless. Yet, some insisted on contributing, dragging themselves to the ramparts in their fervent desire to hurl stones, often succumbing to exhaustion in the attempt. Others quietly starved themselves, donating their rations to younger defenders. Such acts of self-sacrifice are seldom recorded in historical records, but they were ever present during sieges. Meanwhile, a different yet equally devastating set of problems emerged in the Ottoman camp. The Ottoman army was not a unified entity, but a coalition of diverse groups with varied motivations. The Janissaries fought for Suleiman the Magnificent and Islam, their morale remaining relatively high throughout the campaign. However, the provincial troops from Anatolia and Rumelia were essentially conscripted peasants yearning to return home. Mercenaries fought for pay, and when payment became unreliable, as it invariably does during prolonged campaigns, their loyalty wavered. These divergent motivations created fractures within the Ottoman ranks. Janissaries held the provincial troops in disdain for their perceived lack of martial prowess. The provincial troops resented the Janissaries for their superior equipment and provisions. Mercenaries harbored ill will towards everyone, as they died for an empire not their own. The rivalry and misunderstandings between Ahmed Pasha and Ali Pasha only worsened the situation. Soldiers were unsure whose orders to follow when their commanders contradicted each other. A logistical breakdown accelerated this disintegration. When rice rations were reduced, soldiers accused officers of corruption, sometimes with justification. It was common practice in medieval armies for officers to hoard food while soldiers starved. Whether this occurred at Eger is less important than the fact that the soldiers believed it did. This belief poisoned morale more effectively than any Hungarian weapon. Disease transformed the Ottoman camp into a death trap. Dysentery kills slowly and agonizingly. Victims endure days of debilitating cramps, dehydration, and weakness. They become too incapacitated to fight, yet not sick enough to be sent home. Thus, they lingered in their tents, spreading infection among their comrades, creating expanding circles of illness throughout the camp. Without modern understanding of sanitation, 15th-century armies couldn't halt the spread of disease. They didn't know how to isolate sick soldiers. They were unaware that contaminated water sources caused dysentery. They couldn't grasp why some camps were ravaged by illness while others were spared. To them, disease seemed random, almost supernatural, making it even more psychologically devastating. By early October, the Ottoman camp likely held thousands of sick soldiers. While dysentery usually doesn't kill quickly, it incapacitates. This presented commanders with a cruel dilemma. Send sick soldiers home, reducing the fighting force, or keep them in camp where they would infect others. Ahmed and Ali apparently chose the latter, indicating either strategic incompetence or a desperate refusal to concede failure in the campaign. The weather added another layer of suffering. October's cold in Hungary can be unforgiving. Nights brought near-freezing temperatures, with winds piercing through tents. Soldiers without adequate shelter developed symptoms of hypothermia. Frostbite appeared on limbs, and respiratory illnesses spread. The combination of cold, disease, and malnutrition created a perfect storm of human misery. Under these circumstances, the assault on October 17th was no longer truly about capturing Eger. It was about salvation. Ottoman commanders recognized they could not sustain the siege much longer. They desperately needed a victory, any victory, to justify their retreat. A triumph in the assault would have signified their capture of Eger. A failed assault would substantiate Eger's invincibility in any scenario, allowing them to retreat with some semblance of dignity. However, the assault did not just fail, it failed utterly and decisively. The Ottomans committed every available resource against Eger, only to be completely repulsed. This defeat eliminated all remaining options except for a disgraceful withdrawal. October 18th.
The decision to retreat likely brought immense relief to the common soldiers, who had endured 39 days of hellish conditions. For commanders like Ahmed Pasha, though, retreat equated to professional humiliation. He led the second-largest Ottoman army in 1552 and failed to seize a small castle defended by 2,000 men. Such a failure was career-ending. The withdrawal itself spotlighted the Ottomans' rigid discipline. Even in defeat, they avoided panic and did not abandon their equipment. Everything was methodically packed. They retreated in perfect order, even burying their dead whenever feasible. Despite their low morale, this was still a professional army capable of fighting. However, it was defeated less by a numerically superior adversary and more by its own internal constraints, logistical issues, disease, adverse weather, and, most critically, the realization that some fortresses were impenetrable, regardless of how many soldiers were thrown against them. For the defenders, watching from Eger's walls, the Ottoman withdrawal must have seemed surreal. For 39 days, they had anticipated death. Each morning ushered in fresh attacks. Each night was filled with dread about what tomorrow would bring. Then, completely unexpectedly, inexplicably, the enemy departed. The psychological impact would have been profound. From peak stress to sudden relief, from constant mortal danger to relative safety, from utter hopelessness to unforeseen salvation. Many defenders likely experienced what we would today recognize as shock, emotional numbness, an inability to process events, a detachment from reality. But there was no time to dwell on the trauma. The castle lay in ruins. The walls necessitated immediate repair before the weather inflicted further damage. Bodies had to be buried to avert disease outbreaks. The wounded required treatment. Children needed food. Harsh realities demanded attention, despite pervasive psychological and physical exhaustion. This is often overlooked in historical accounts. Victory doesn't signify recuperation. It implies survival, followed by a vast amount of unheralded, painstaking labor. Eger's glorious triumph was immediately succeeded by weeks of clearing bodies, mending walls, treating infected wounds, and attempting to restore some semblance of normalcy. And underlying everything was a thought no one dared voice, but everyone pondered. What if they return? News of Eger spread across Europe with unprecedented speed. Battlefield reports were published in Vienna, Prague, and Venice. People were astonished. 2,000 men had defeated 40,000. How was this possible? King Ferdinand, who had refused to send reinforcements when Dobo pleaded for assistance, now hastily dispatched awards and honors. He granted Dobo the Transylvanian cities of Deva and Samosuvar. He appointed Dobo as voivode, essentially governor of all Transylvania, one of the kingdom's most influential positions. Gergely Bornemissza was given command of Eger Castle. At 26, he became one of the youngest and most respected generals in the Hungarian army. Bornemisza's story, however, did not have a happy ending. In 1554, just 2 years after Eger, Bornemissza fell into an Ottoman ambush.
He was captured alive and taken to Constantinople. The Ottomans understood his value. They offered him a deal. Reveal Eger's defensive secrets, and you will be free, rich, and respected. Refuse, and you will die. Bornemissza declined. In 1555, he was hanged in Constantinople. He was 29 years old. Why? Why did a young man with his whole life ahead of him choose death over betrayal? This is a question each generation must answer for itself. But perhaps the answer lies in what Bornemissza experienced at Eger. He witnessed what happens when people unite for something greater than themselves. He saw women pouring boiling water from the walls because they would not let their children live under occupation. He saw Dobo direct fire at his own men to save the castle. And he understood that some things transcend individual survival. When Ottoman interrogators offered him life in exchange for information, Bornemissza knew what his consent would entail. Every future siege would utilize those secrets against Hungarian defenders. Every castle that fell due to his betrayal would weigh on his conscience. Every child enslaved, every woman captured, every man killed, all would be consequences of his choice to prioritize his own life over the lives of others. Thus, he chose death, not because he wished to die, but because he could not live as the man who betrayed everything Eger stood for. This lonely decision was made in a Constantinople prison, without admirers to witness his bravery or any assurance that his refusal would ever be known. This truly exemplifies genuine heroism. It's not the glorious battlefield heroism featuring triumphant assaults, but rather the quiet courage of choosing principle over survival when no one is observing. István Dobo's life after Eger turned into a political sorrow. In 1569, amid Transylvanian magnates plotting secession from Habsburg rule, Dobo was incarcerated on suspicion of involvement. He was cleared and eventually released, but trust had been shattered. The individual who had preserved Hungary was distrusted by the very people he had served. He passed away in 1572, in his home, at the age of 70. His memory had nearly faded. No grand funeral, no monument. Only a humble gravestone marking the resting place of a man who saved a nation, and Eger itself. The fortress was repaired and reinforced.
Yet, in 1596, 44 years following the Great Victory, Eger eventually fell. This didn't occur because of a massive army, but due to treachery. The 7,000 defenders, primarily foreign mercenaries, surrendered to Sultan Mehmed III with scarcely any resistance. Why did this happen? The problem was that they lacked the essential element present in the 1552 defenders, a much stronger motivation to fight than mere financial compensation. Eger remained under Ottoman control for 91 years. Churches were converted into mosques. The castle was rebuilt and strengthened by Turkish engineers. A minaret was erected, which still stands today, marking the northernmost minaret ever constructed by the Ottoman Empire. In 1687, Eger was finally liberated by combined Austro-Hungarian forces, but the city was permanently altered. Generations raised under Ottoman dominion possessed entirely different memories, attachments, and ambitions. So, did that 1552 victory truly matter?
If Eger succumbed 44 years later anyway, were those 39 days even significant? The answer is yes, because 44 years in history represents a substantial duration. It spans 2 full generations of individuals who grew up in freedom. It amounts to 44 years during which revenue from the Kassa mines funded Habsburg defense rather than the Ottoman treasury. It allowed Vienna 44 years to ready itself for forthcoming sieges. More crucially, it provided Hungarians 44 years to maintain their own narrative. A tale of their steadfastness, a story about ordinary people who transformed into heroes. A narrative no sultan could erase. Eger's strategic importance extended far beyond the citadel itself. The triumph showed that Ottoman expansion wasn't inevitable. Other strongholds, inspired by Eger's example, found the courage to resist. The psychological shift was immense, moving from the belief that Ottomans were unbeatable to the idea, Ottomans can be defeated if one acts smartly and never gives up. This psychological transformation influenced European military thought for generations. Eger became a paradigm in defensive warfare. Military strategists dissected Dobo's tactics. Engineers studied the fortress's fortifications. Commanders recognized that numerical superiority isn't everything. Preparation, leadership, and morale hold far greater weight. This narrative also became a cultural emblem of Hungarian identity. During the 19th century, as Hungary fought for its uniqueness within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, authors and artists revisited Eger as a symbol of Hungarian resilience. Gardonyi Géza's 1899 novel, Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, was more than just historical fiction. It was a message to contemporary Hungarians. Look at what your ancestors achieved. You can achieve it too. The novel was adapted into a spectacular film in 1968, one of the most expensive ever produced in Hungary. It continues to be aired annually on Hungarian television. Each new generation of Hungarian children grows up with this story. It shapes their understanding of national character, not as victims of history, but as people who confronted impossible odds and persevered. And not just Hungarians. The story of Eger has inspired countless tales of ordinary individuals facing insurmountable challenges. It has influenced our perception of defense, of courage, of what humans can achieve when united. But perhaps the most vital lesson from Eger isn't about conflict. It concerns how we confront seemingly insurmountable obstacles in our own lives. We all experience moments when we face our own 40,000 Ottomans. Perhaps it's a medical diagnosis, financial ruin, a personal tragedy, or simply the feeling that the world is too vast and we are too small to make a difference. In such times, remember, he didn't win because he was stronger, but because he was better prepared. He didn't win because he was fearless, but because he did what was necessary. Despite the fear, remember, Bornemissza, he lacked the weaponry the Ottomans possessed, so he innovated arms they had never encountered. When you can't compete with might, contend with creativity. Recall the women of Eger? They weren't trained for combat, yet they discovered ways to contribute. They transformed ordinary skills into survival tools. You possess abilities you consider common, but in the proper context, they become extraordinary. And above all, remember that 2,000 individuals didn't vanquish 40,000 because they were the most formidable. They triumphed because they refused to yield.
To battle for 39 consecutive days, losing hundreds, witnessing walls crumble, constantly hearing cannons, and still persisting. This kind of courage is within everyone's reach. Not the bravery of isolated heroic acts, but the courage of perseverance. The courage to awaken each day and declare, "Today, I'll endure another day." Because that's how Eger was saved, not by one miraculous moment, but by 39 days of thousands of minor decisions, each proclaiming, "We will not give up." If 2,000 individuals could hold out against 40,000 for 39 days, you can endure whatever challenges you face today. Now, returning to my initial question, was Eger's victory a miracle, luck, or strategy? The answer is all three, but not in the way you might imagine. Yes, there was fortune. Autumn arrived early. The Ottomans ran out of ammunition twice. Dysentery spread through their camp, and such occurrences were entirely beyond István Dobo's control. However, luck favors only those prepared to seize it. Had Dobo not provisioned 39 days' worth of food, no amount of luck would have sufficed. Had Gergely Bornemissza not experimented with explosives, inclement weather alone wouldn't have been enough. Had the civilians not been organized into effective work teams, all the luck in the world wouldn't have saved Eger. And yes, a strategy existed, but not the grand, genius strategy we often envision. Dobo was no Hannibal or Napoleon. His tactics were straightforward. Prepare every minute detail, utilize all available resources, and never surrender. This is an approach anyone can master. It's about meticulousness, patience, and flawlessly executing small tasks until they lead to something monumental. But the most crucial factor that transformed potential victory into reality cannot be gleaned from strategy books. People understood something many commanders fail to grasp. In defense, morale is more vital than weaponry. You can possess the world's thickest walls,
But if the defenders lack faith in the cause, those walls are useless. Conversely, you can have the weakest walls, but if the defenders are willing to die for their convictions, those walls become impregnable. Dobo achieved this by treating everyone, including civilians and women, as valued participants. He didn't tell them to be silent and let the actual soldiers do their job. He said, "This is your task, it's important, and we need you." And people responded, not because they were paid. Most weren't. Not because they believed they would survive. Most knew they would likely perish. They responded because they finally felt part of something greater than themselves. This is the first lesson of Eger. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about making people feel their contributions matter. The second lesson: innovation arises from desperation. Bornemissza didn't invent grenades and bombs because he was a genius. He invented them because he had no other option. Confronted by an enemy 20 times his number, you cannot fight them traditionally. You must discover something they haven't seen before. This is a lesson for anyone facing insurmountable challenges. Don't try to imitate those stronger than you. Find what you can do that they cannot. The third lesson: diversity is strength. The defenders of Eger were not uniform. They were professional soldiers, peasants, nobles, the poor, men and women, Lutherans and Catholics. In most armies of that era, this diversity would have been a weakness. But Dobo transformed it into a strength by assigning everyone a role suited to their skills. Women weren't asked to fight with swords. They were asked to do what they already did well: cook, but now boiling water as a weapon; sew, but now making powder bags; and care, but now for the wounded. German gunners performed their trained duties.
Hungarian miners used their digging skills for countermines. This is a lesson for any organization. Don't try to force everyone into a single mold. Discover and cultivate their unique strengths. The fourth lesson, perhaps the most critical: some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds of losing are high. Bornemissza could have remained alive if he had betrayed Eger's secrets, but he chose death. Why? Not because he feared death, but because he feared something more than death: living as a traitor to his convictions. When the Ottoman interrogators offered him his life in exchange for information, Bornemissza knew what agreeing would mean. Each future siege would leverage those intercepted secrets against the Hungarian defenders. Every stronghold that fell due to his treachery would burden his conscience. Every child enslaved, every woman captured, every man slain, all direct consequences of his choice to prioritize his own life over the lives of others. This is a lesson that our contemporary world frequently overlooks. Not everything can be compromised. There are principles worth striving for, even at significant personal cost. And at times, steadfastness, even in defeat, holds more weight than survival through capitulation. Eger teaches us that victory isn't always about winning the immediate skirmish. Sometimes it's about crafting a narrative from which subsequent generations can derive invaluable wisdom. Even today, 5 centuries later, the tale of Eger continues to be recounted. We still draw inspiration from Dobo, Bornemissza, and the women on the ramparts. This is a triumph that no sultan could ever undo. The lessons extend beyond individual bravery, highlighting collective action. Eger illustrates what transpires when not just an army, but an entire community resists. The fortress endured not solely due to brilliant leadership. It stood firm because every person, irrespective of their role or standing, contributed their utmost towards a shared objective. This challenges our modern inclination towards individualism. We glorify solitary heroes, lone geniuses, singular leaders, exceptional warriors. Yet, the truth of Eger is more intricate and potent. The victory emerged from 2,000 individuals performing unromantic, grueling tasks daily: hauling stones, boiling water, standing watch, mending walls, treating wounds, preparing meals. These acts, individually unremarkable, collectively acquired heroic significance. Ponder what this implies for present-day challenges: climate change, political polarization, economic disparity. These issues often appear insurmountable because we seek individual solutions or singular saviors. However,
Eger presents an alternative, collective endeavor. Everyone contributes, sustaining the effort over extended periods, despite exhaustion and doubt.
The siege also reveals the limits of power. The Ottomans possessed every advantage: numerical superiority, advanced weaponry, extensive experience, vast resources. They should have secured an easy victory. Their defeat demonstrates that brute force, devoid of flexibility, understanding of the adversary, and sustained morale, is ultimately doomed to fail. This influences our approach to conflicts at every level. In business, colossal corporations with limitless resources sometimes succumb to small startups because size breeds inflexibility. In politics, powerful movements collapse when they lose touch with why people initially believed in them. In personal life, we often try to overpower problems with sheer effort, neglecting to consider if we're even employing the correct approach. Dobo's brilliance wasn't in possessing abundant resources, but in perfectly utilizing his limited ones. Unable to match the Ottoman firepower, he concentrated on preparation, morale, and innovative tactics. If you cannot triumph through superior force, triumph through superior efficiency. Finally, Eger instructs us on the interplay between physical and psychological warfare. The castle's physical fortifications were undeniably important, but what ultimately stalled the Ottoman siege wasn't the impregnability of the walls. It was the psychological impossibility of victory that became apparent to the attackers. The Ottomans could have persisted. They still maintained numerical superiority, but they had lost faith. Once soldiers began spreading tales of supernatural defenders and magical blood, the siege was effectively over. The physical battle continued, but the psychological battle had been lost. This unveils a profound insight. Belief dictates outcomes as powerfully as material conditions do. The defenders believed they could hold out for one more day, and they did. The attackers ceased believing they could win, and thus they could not. The same battlefield, the same weapons, yet differing convictions yield divergent results. In your own trials, this holds immense significance. Objective circumstances matter, but your belief in those circumstances can matter more. If you believe a problem is insurmountable, you will approach it half-heartedly and prove yourself right. If you believe solutions exist, you will search until you discover them. The most profound lesson of Eger isn't about medieval siege warfare. It's about human potential when individuals unite around a common purpose, refuse to accept defeat, and maintain faith, even when logic suggests hopelessness. This is why the story resonates after 5 centuries. Because we all face our own sieges, and we all need to be reminded that impossible things become possible when ordinary people collectively perform extraordinary acts. Today, you can still visit Eger Castle. The walls still stand, rebuilt, fortified, yet they are the very same walls that Dobo defended. As you walk the ramparts, you can envision Bornemissza unleashing his grenades. From the shredded bastion, you look down, imagining the commander Dobo directing his cannons to aim at the old gate. If you listen carefully, every day at 3:52 p.m., you'll hear the boom of a cannon shot. This serves as Eger's daily reminder of the precise moment the 1552 siege began, a shot echoing the events that transpired there. In the city, you can purchase Gergely Bornemissza, or bull's blood, a robust red wine said to have granted superhuman strength to Hungarian soldiers, according to local lore. While the legend itself isn't factual, the underlying truth is profound. The wine offered fearful individuals a fleeting moment of bravery, and sometimes a single moment is all that's required. The story of Eger has been told for centuries. Poet Sebastian Tinoti Lantos documented it immediately after the siege. In 1827, Mihai Vărășmarty penned an epic poem inspired by it. However, the most renowned version remains Geza Gardoni's novel, Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, published in 1899. This book transcended mere historical fiction. It emerged during a period when Hungary sought to define its identity within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Gardoni implored his readers, "See what your ancestors accomplished. They stood firm when all seemed lost. You can do the same." In 1968, the novel was adapted into a spectacular film, one of the most expensive in Hungarian history,
and it continues to be broadcast annually on Hungarian television. Every generation of Hungarian children grows up with this narrative, and its influence extends beyond Hungary's borders. The tale of Eger has inspired countless stories of ordinary individuals confronting impossible odds. It has shaped our understanding of defense, courage, and what people can achieve when united. Yet, perhaps the most profound lesson from Eger transcends warfare. It speaks to confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges in one's own life. We all encounter moments akin to facing our personal 1,000 Ottomans. This might manifest as a serious medical diagnosis, financial collapse, or personal loss. Perhaps it's simply the feeling that the world is too vast and you too insignificant to affect change. In such moments, recall Dobo. His victory wasn't born from superior strength, but from meticulous preparation. He triumphed not from a lack of fear, but by acting despite it. Remember Bornemissza? Lacking the Turks' weaponry, he innovated entirely new solutions. When you cannot compete with force, compete with ingenuity. Think of the women of Eger. Untrained in combat, they discovered ways to contribute, transforming everyday skills into tools for survival. You possess skills you might consider ordinary, yet in the right context, they can prove extraordinary. Most importantly, remember that 2,000 defenders overcame 40,000 attackers, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to surrender. To fight for 39 consecutive days, to suffer hundreds of casualties, to witness crumbling walls and endure constant cannon fire, and still persist, that is the courage available to everyone. It's not the courage of singular heroic acts, but the courage of perseverance. The courage to awaken each day and declare, "Today I will endure one more day." This is how Eger was saved, not by one miraculous event, but by 39 days of thousands of small decisions, each echoing, "We will not give up." If 2,000 people could stand against 40,000 for 39 days, then you too can face whatever challenges confront you today. So, when you encounter your own challenge, whatever it may be, ask yourself, what would Dobo do? How would I prepare? What resources would I utilize? Where would I find the strength? Then, act day by day, decision by decision, one small act of courage at a time. Because that is how Eger was saved, not by a single magical moment, but by 39 days of thousands of minor choices, each proclaiming, "We will not retreat." And if 2,000 individuals could hold the line against 40,000 for 39 days, then you too can withstand any adversity. This is the message of Eger. This is why we continue to recount this story 500 years later. And this is why, every day at 3:52 p.m. in Eger, a cannon fires, reminding us that the impossible remains so only until someone makes it possible. If this story has inspired you, please leave a comment sharing the seemingly insurmountable tasks you face in your life. Let this community support each other, just as the people of Eger supported one another on those walls in 1552. Subscribe to avoid missing other historical narratives of bravery, strategy, and individuals overcoming unthinkable obstacles. And if you wish, share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are stronger than they realize. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, history isn't just what happened, it's also what we learn to do better.